Alright, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen, wassalatu wassalam ala Sayyid al-Anbiya Muhammad wa alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in, amma ba'd. Can you start up the Instagram, Yusuf? I don't know how to use this thing. This is actually the last discussion that you'll find in all Usul al-Fiqh books, which is called Ijtihad with Taqleed. You guys heard these terms before? Ijtihad and Taqleed. What is Ijtihad?
There's a research account.
Okay, like research, that's one interpretation. Deductive reasoning is another translation that some people use. Deriving a ruling, this is another translation that some people use. And then they also mention the opposite of that, which is taqleed. What is taqleed?
Copying.
I'm sorry? Taqleed, copying, yes, that's one way of translating it. What else?
Following.
I'm sorry?
Following.
Following, okay. Anything else? Is there anything wrong with taqleed? Sometimes. All right, when is it a problem and when is it not?
It's just gonna create several groups against each other. The copy
so-
guy against the copiers of that guy.
Okay, so is that now you're adding something to the taqleed?
I'm talking practice.
No, I'm saying you've added something to taqleed because you have now somebody who's following someone else, right? He's following a school or an institution or a madhab. That in itself, you guys said is okay, right? Or no?
If, pretty much.
Okay, it's okay. But the layer that you're adding is what? Is that I follow this institution, therefore
The guy who follows that institution.
everybody else is wrong, and everybody else is problematic. So this is not just taqleed. This is now you've added to taqleed something that we call ta'assub, right? Ta'assub is partisanship, right? Where you feel you are better, you feel your understanding is better, you feel that your dealings are better, and this is why it becomes extremely problematic. And like I said, this is the last chapter in Usul. This is the last chapter in legal theory that the scholars talk about. Imam Haramain, he says, he have sacred, so these are the conditions for the mujtahid. These are the conditions for or what he calls the mufti. There are conditions for the mufti. There are a lot of terms that at this stage are used interchangeably. From them the mujtahid, from them the faqih, from them the mufti. All of these terms are used very interchangeably in the literature. And he says that he have knowledge of sacred law. Sacred law is what? The Qur'an and Sunnah, right? The Sharia. Both in methodology and in application, both in areas of scholarly disagreement and adopted positions. And the second, he have all the tools that are needed for ijtihad, and that he know what he needs in order to derive legal rulings, such as grammar, Arabic language, hadith narrators, and the explanation of Quranic verses, and hadith and ahkam that are connected with legal rulings. These are the two conditions that he put, that he be knowledgeable of the Sharia, and he have all the tools necessary to derive rulings. Is there anything else that you guys feel is important here? Or are these two conditions enough? Or are you guys not awake yet? When you think of a mufti, when you think of a mujtahid, when you think, huh?
I would add to note it.
Okay. Understanding the situation that you're dealing with, the processes and the mechanisms. Okay, I would definitely agree with that. Absolutely. Why do you think Imam al-Haramain didn't mention it?
He presumed that he's going to.
Right, that's something that's presumed. It's something for him that was understood. Or what you would do is he would actually might have put this under Sharia. So when he talks about Sharia, it's not just a theoretical knowledge of the Sharia, it's also a practical application and implementation of it. I think maybe the app needs to be updated, I'm not sure. Because I was having a problem finding Reels last time too, or Live or whatever it is. There's something that stands out for me here. There are many of the fuqaha, or many of the scholars of fiqh, they were really good grammarians. They had a good grasp of the Arabic language. Their understanding and how to actually extract ahkam from different verses in a hadith were fine. But here he says hadith narrators. How versed was Imam al-Haramain himself in hadith? He wasn't particularly strong. Like him, Ghazali, same thing. Not to say that they didn't have knowledge, but it was clear that that was not their specialty when they spoke about hadith. It was very, they would use weak hadith and they would pass them by as if these are things that are meant to be, rulings are to be extracted from. And Imam al-Haramain himself, he used to give fatwa, yes? Not just give fatwa, he is actually one of the pioneers in the madhab, in writing. He has a very famous book, which is, I don't know if you guys are familiar with it. It's called Nihayat al-Matlab. And Nihayat al-Matlab, what he did is he actually gathered all of the different issues. He authored, he wrote about them. And the thing that is very unique about the book, he actually talks about how he arrived to those rulings. And this is not something that you find in all books of fiqh. His student, what did he do with it? His student Ghazali, what did he do with Nihayat al-Matlab? He summarized it in 3 books. And I never remember the order, but like Basit, Wajiz, and Wasit, right? And all of these now are available. They've been published and they're now available, Wallah alhamd. But it just shows the importance that Imam Ghazali himself gave to his teacher's book and how fundamental it was to the madhab. Saying that, if we understand that having this knowledge of narrators is not something that's fundamental, and Imam al-Haramain, I'm sure he recognized in himself that this is not his strength. But he himself continued giving fatwa. And he himself continued making Ishihad. What do you think he means here?
Can I go to the iPad and put it in?
Yeah, sure, whatever, bro, I don't.
What he means by narrative?
Yeah. Do you think he really went through, Ibn Abi Hatim's Jarh wa Ta'dil, or Masail Imam Ahmad, started reading all the different ilal of the different ahadith, or going through Imam Bukhari's Tarikh and studying all of the different individual narrators?
Not doing it from scratch.
I don't think he did. I honestly don't think that was even his interest. Because not every scholar, here when he talks about studying grammar, is he talking about becoming, or is he talking about becoming Sibawayh? And for those of you who don't know, these are like very famous grammarians. Was that his intention when he wrote this? That you can only become a mujtahid, you can only become somebody who practices ijtihad or gives ifta if you are a scholar in that field? No. That's absolutely 100% clear. And the reason we know that these things are so important for them is when you look actually in the studies and the discussions in the Usul books, a lot of those discussions are based around what? Right? Linguistics. Right? A lot of them are based on grammatical rules, linguistics. When you talk about things that are general, things that are specific, how do you recognize that? Those are all linguistic tools. And they included those in legal theory discussions. So you know that they had to be very well versed in Arabic. There's no doubt about that. But we don't find the same type of scholarship in hadith. Why? Or how come he mentions it, but he himself is not somebody who is known to speak about narrators or to criticize asanid or to criticize a hadith? This was not Juwayni thing.
Maybe you only need to know enough for the hadith.
Sure. So how much do I need to know? And this brings to our question, right? Why even have this system in place? Why put these conditions? We'll deal with each of these subsections. Why have these conditions in the first place? So these 2 conditions that Imam al-Haramain put forward, why?
To standardize.
You need to standardize things, right? This is, and not just that people don't abuse rulings. And so when somebody comes to you and you're like, yeah, let's have some chicken, and they'll be like, no, chicken is haram. How do I know whether I can trust this person or not?
Is it based on?
Okay, their background, for sure. And you have to standardize these, right? And this is what's really important. In the formalization of judiciary and understanding that there's a formal process in place to help people, why have these institutions of knowledge? So even Imam Ghazali, he was very famously a graduate of what? Madrasa Nizamiya. Right? And why have that system in place? And even the people who graduated from that madrasa, what did they go on to do?
To teach them.
Right? Either they went to teach, or what else?
State jobs.
They got jobs in the state, right? And the state was the biggest employer, not just the biggest employer, but they also paid.
Good.
They paid well. They paid good. So you had these clergy who were going, so during Imam Ghazali's time, if I wanted to become famous and I wanted to become rich, where did I study? I studied Sharia. I would go and I would study Sharia. Why? Because the possibility of becoming a judge or a clerk or a lawyer, somebody who speaks and somebody who understands the law. And even today, one of the highest paid positions in service, right? So outside of business, one of the highest paid positions are lawyers. Lawyers, judges, all of these individuals are supported by the state and they tend to do extremely well. So nothing has really shifted or changed. The only thing that's changed is at that time there was an importance in the Sharia and now there's an importance in Qanun, right? Man-made laws. So knowledge of the Sharia. So here are some things, a breakdown of what that entails and what that actually means. So Usul, which is what we're studying and what we spend time with, understanding the difference between general and specific, understanding where abrogation takes place, understanding how to reconcile conflicting proofs. Right, these are very important tools that the faqih or the mujtahid or the mufti needs to have. How to apply them, and this application is what fiqh is. Right, when we apply these legal rules and we apply them to an individual or to a space or to a thing, this is what fiqh actually is. This application. This application, it requires context, it is specific to situations, and it's important always to keep in mind fatwa of previous scholars. Why is that important? Okay, sometimes there's a stepping stone, and not just that. If I know that there are 5, 6, 7 people who preceded me, that gives me what? Gives me confidence that this is the correct ruling. It's important to have somebody who precedes us. And the other reason it's important to have somebody who precedes us is to show that sometimes when a scholar of the past speaks, so when you have an imam who says something, why is it important to even take that imam's statement into consideration? Why can't I just reject it? Why can't I just say like I have the tools of ijtihad too, and he had tools of ijtihad, and I can do ijtihad just like him? Why can't I say that?
To give the bigger picture of the time.
Okay, so what is the context that I need to have here? If I'm saying that, okay, Shafi'i, he's just a man, right? All of these tools of ijtihad, I have all these tools of ijtihad too. Ahmed, he's virtuous and pious, but he's a man at the end of the day. I'm a man too. Why give them importance? Islam. I mean, there's a number of reasons. Huh?
They were earlier, so they have more of a first-hand knowledge than we do.
Okay, so you're touching on an important point. If they were earlier, why does that give them any virtue? Are you telling me I'm born in the wrong time, therefore my opinion doesn't have value? Is that what you're trying to tell me?
No, but that's the evolution of the hadith was in their time.
The evolution of what?
The hadith.
The evolution of hadith was in their time. What does that mean?
Like they're the ones who were like closer to the tabi'een, and therefore they started fresh. Today there's more confusion than ever.
Okay.
There wasn't like confusion at the time.
So
They didn't have the internet.
okay. Right. The internet, I think, is a great index. I think
it is, but it also has some confusion.
it can for somebody who doesn't know how to use it, right?
Depends.
But there's a number of things here, and there's a couple points that you touched on. Is the advantage of living in an earlier time is that it's not just the proximity to the Prophet ﷺ, it's proximity to who?
The companions.
To the companions, or at least who?
Companions.
Or their students. So if I have access to all of these resources, do I have access to any of those resources today? And at the least, even if you have an imam who has access to a tabi, right? So a student of a companion, the chances that this individual took all his rulings from the companions is significantly higher. And even if this imam is giving fatwa, it's not even necessary that he attribute the fatwa to that person. Because at the end of the day, yes, the imams, they were human beings, they were blessed, and the ummah agrees upon their imamship. All of those things are definitely important, right? There's no doubt about that. In addition to understanding, they had access to resources and people and fatwa and knowledge and things that have been lost to us. Even many of Imam Ahmad's statements, right? So you know how, and for those of you who are somewhat familiar with the madhab, for Imam Ahmed, for most of the issues that he spoke about, what do we find? There are always two opinions, right? There are always two opinions. Where do I find those opinions? It's going to be from his students, right? So Khalal is probably one of the biggest narrators of all of the issues of Imam Ahmed. We don't even have his book, right? There's sections of his book that we have today, but we don't have all of it. So there's certain context to what he's saying that has been lost to us. And the reason I'm saying this is that, okay, if this is just concerning the Imam, what about the knowledge that they had that was available to them? Having access to resources, having access to people, having access to circumstances, right? So the thing is, because they were closer to the time of the Prophet ﷺ, how much was there of a lifestyle shift in 100 years? Right? It's not like technology, you know, so technology, when technology is high, how quickly does technology move? Exponentially, right? So if technology is here, it's going to move much faster. And for those of us who are older than 18, right, we've experienced the shift in lifestyle, even in our own lifetimes, even though it's been very short. You know, how many people here had cell phones like 10 years ago? You know, it's been a big shift. But before, like even before that, you know, how did we get in contact? Or, you know, you had to wait until 9 p.m. because that's when calls were free. You know, I mean, like there are a lot of restrictions that we had. You know, or you used to, what did you used to send, like a text message, right? Because text messages were like 25 cents each. And like, yeah, and like all these things have shifted and this changed. And look at the huge shift that's happened just in 10 years. When technology is on the low end, how long do those shifts take to happen? It's more flat, right? It's more flat. When did the huge shift come for mankind in general?
Industrial Revolution.
The Industrial Revolution, right? And when did the Industrial Revolution happen?
17.
Right? It's like, I mean, it's not even that long ago. You're talking about like a couple hundred years ago. If you and look at the world 250 years ago and look at the world today. And who would have imagined within 250 years you'd be able to fly? You know, that you're literally sitting on a chair in the middle of the sky, getting to a space, you know, on the internet, right? You know what I mean? Like being able to communicate with people, it would be mind-boggling for someone. Someone would be like, no, that's magic, right? If you talk to someone 250 years ago, say, hey, listen, in 200 years, you're going to be sitting on this magical seat that's going to float in the sky, and you're going to be able to communicate with multiple people at the same time. But when you go back, if you go back 1400 years ago, a change in 100 years or 200 years, what kind of technological advances did they have? Think about it. So for those people who were riding camels during the time of the Prophet ﷺ, 200 years later, what were they riding? They're still riding camels, right? there's no shift. There's no huge breakthrough in technology that happened that you had this huge shift in culture. And the reason I'm saying that is because of that. Even Imam Shafi'i, for those of you that know, he's actually considered one of the barriers or one of the baselines for what? If Imam Shafi'i says something, and I'm not talking about fiqh, if Imam Shafi'i says something, in the Arabic language, and he died in 204. So you're talking about almost 200 years after the Prophet ﷺ, even the Arabs themselves, they didn't feel that there was a huge shift in what? In the language. To the point where they would say, we still rely on Imam Shafi'i, and we go to his diwan, and we go to his collection of poems to understand and help us, give us context to certain ideas, to give us the context to certain idioms and how certain words are being used. So if we understand that there isn't that huge shift, it also gives those scholars of that time insight into what? And how to understand, right? How to understand, and not just that, what is very famous in the Malikis? Amal Ahl Medina. Right? What the people of Medina did. Do you understand now why that's so important? If you don't have a huge shift in culture, and you now have like the kids and the grandkids of the companions, and you see them doing things, Imam Malik himself, he didn't feel that what the grandkids were doing was very different from what? For during the time of the Prophet ﷺ. He was like, no, I don't think there's a huge cultural shift. I don't think there's a big difference. And this is why when I see the people of Medina doing something, for me it is it's an evidence and it's a proof. Does it make sense now why? And not just that, he can go to someone and he'd be like, hey, listen, why do you do this? He'd be like, oh, well, my grandfather told me. And his grandfather is who? He's a companion, right? Or his grandfather's a tabi'i. And it's not even necessary that Imam Malik tells us who he heard it from. It's not necessary that he shares that. It's not necessary that he shares that information with us. So sometimes you have just fatwa by themselves, right? So you have somebody who's just giving fatwa, and he's not attributing the fatwa to anyone. But that fatwa and a fatwa of today, do we understand now why it has more weight? Because there's so much context around that fatwa, and there's so many possibilities of the type of information that has reached this person, and that possibility of that information reaching us today is what? It's gone, right? It's gone. Like there have been books, like there are more books lost to us than that are available. Does that you guys? You know what I mean? Just think about that. There are more books that have been lost than books that we have recovered. The only thing we can say for surety that has reached us is what? The Qur'an and the Sunnah of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Right? These are two things for sure that we can say reached us. But and there are a handful of books. There are a handful of books that are attributable and that have still reached us. But I'm saying, like, even the Risala of Imam Shafi'i, right? Something that he wrote himself, or his these weren't really published until when? Right, in the last century. Like, it's not even that long ago. And even when somebody was publishing it, you know what happened? He was criticized by others. Like, what are you doing? Shafi'is. Just imagine. Shafi'is themselves, what are you doing printing Imam Shafi'i's books? Why do you think they took that attitude?
Because people will forget it.
No, they were saying don't print it. They said, why you're wasting your time printing it? Why are you doing that? Why? And this is something we're going to talk about in the obstacles to ijtihad.
Why we shouldn't print books?
Yeah.
Why?
Why do you think? Somebody comes to you and he's like, man, I found this manuscript of Risala, or I found this manuscript of and I want to put it into publication. And all the scholars are like, what are you doing? You're wasting your time. Why?
Not for memory loss?
Who are you? Who are you to what? To understand Shafi. What is the point of this entire tradition that we have? In all these books, in these hawashi, and these, you know what I mean? All of these explanations that we have of all of these books. The madhab is what? The madhab is mudawwan, khalas. The madhab has been preserved. It's been preserved where? In our modern books. These are the things that have passed down. There's no reason to go back to the sources. Alhamdulillah, the culture has shifted and changed. So we had talked about reconciliation of positions, and this is important, right? Understanding the reasonings for differing, because if I understand the reasons of why people differ, it gives me insight to why this person has this position, and ideally, in my heart, it should create more what? Tolerance. This is important. This is something, and this is the problem that we had talked about with ta'assub and partisanship, and even understanding the positions. If I understand that there are other positions in other madhahib, how can I benefit from that?
If you're in a difficult position, you could take someone else.
I can borrow, right? I can do something that is called al-Fiqh, right? I can actually borrow a position from another madhab, even though it's not mine, but I'm like, man, this is just an easier way to deal with this. Modern example. When the masjid is full, the only space that we have to pray is in the library.
Ahead of the imam.
And the library is actually ahead of the imam. All of the madhahib say that what? Invalid. Not just impermissible. The prayer is invalid. Except the Malikis. The Malikis allow it. So what did we do? We adopted it and we borrowed that position. Which brings us to another question. Do we live in a post-madhab era? We'll talk about it. So here, tools of the mujtahid, we said language. This is something that's really important. Grammar. So even when we talk about like ilm al-ma'ani, and we talk about ilm al-bayan and stuff like that, when we talk about ma'ani is like ma'ani nahwiya. So it's actually an extension of nahu. It's actually an extension of grammar. There's a shift in meaning based on context and use. It's very important to understand that. Arabic language, the meanings of individual words, how those words change in different contexts, how those words change in different uses. Idioms, this is something that's really important. SubhanAllah, there's actually a dictionary for idioms. It's called al-Mustaqsa. What he does is like you actually can go through and he has different sayings and he actually translates what those sayings mean. You know what I mean? So you have these things. It's really interesting. Hadith, understanding if that hadith is sound or not. tafsir of verses, of hadith, and obviously fiqh, right? So fiqh is something where he includes this in Sharia, and this is part of the tools of the mujtahid. Any questions on any of these tools? And like we said, a person does not need to be what?
Scholar.
A person doesn't need to be scholar in these things, but he needs to be well versed. He needs to be grounded in these sciences. And what do we mean by grounded? Meaning that if I have a problem in understanding a word, I, as the mujtahid, know what?
How to
Where to go, right? I know what books to use, how to understand it, right? I don't just open up, Google and I just start looking up things, right? Or I don't pick up a random book to look up the meaning of the word. There are books that are considered the masadir. These are considered the reference points, and I have to understand what they are and how to use those reference points. Even books of hadith, so for example, if I have a hadith, even if it's in Sahih Bukhari, there are some things that I as a Muslim need to know. How did he title the chapter, and how did Imam Bukhari himself use the hadith? Is this hadith mu'allaq or is it muttasid? Is it something that he meant to show this is the strongest hadith in the chapter, but even I don't feel it is sound. I don't feel it's strong. So, having these understandings and how to deal with it, even with tafsir, understanding sometimes the context. Where was this revealed? Was this revealed in Mecca? Was it revealed in Medina? And that helps me understand who the audience was. And if I understand who the audience is, it helps me better apply that and gives me more context. And lastly, fiqh, usul and application. This is something, we've been spending the entire discussion talking about. So here he closes, I think this is the second to last part, because he closes with, I think he talks about taqleed. So among the conditions for someone who seeks fatwa, so this is somebody who is the mustafti, is that he be allowed to follow a mujtahid. Following means to accept someone's position without proof. Is this a good or bad thing?
It could be both, depending on...
Sure. So give me an example where it's good and give me an example where it's bad.
It's bad when your heart says you feel that you're convinced inside that this is wrong, but you still follow it. Well, you know what?
Okay.
This is easy. I'll do shopping.
Fatwa shopping. Yeah. All right. So when you use your shahwa, right? When you use your desire, when that comes in, that's good. What is a good example of taqleed?
Today's Saturday or
No, I mean that's less.
You give that.
I mean, man.
I'm a Shafi.
I mean, may Allah guide you.
That's the
Even Shafi, alhamdulillah, man. Imam Shafi من الطبقات المالكية. So a good example is if I honestly don't know, right? If I don't know something, what do? Do I need to go and research now?
No.
Do I need to become a mujtahid? Am I obligated to become a mujtahid?
No.
No, absolutely not. I'm not obligated to become a researcher. This is not what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has obligated upon me. What has He obligated upon me?
Go and ask
To ask. To go and ask the people of knowledge. This is what I have been obligated to do. That's all I have to do. I go and I ask them, and He gives me the answer. Is it necessary I understand the mechanism or why? No. It's enough for me that he is trusted by the people. I take the fatwa from him and I go about my day. Do some people need more convincing? Absolutely. Do they have a right to be more convinced? Yes. Does the mufti have to convince them? No. Right? Why? Because it's a consensual relationship. If he doesn't agree, you don't have to agree. And it's completely fine. And at that point, I am allowed to fatwa shop. Because I'm not shopping for a desired answer. I'm shopping because I want conviction and I want to understand. So according to this definition, accepting the statement of the Prophet ﷺ is also taqleed. Others say that following is to accept someone's position without knowing what his position is based on. Based on this, if we say the Prophet ﷺ used to judge based on qiyas, meaning that there are situations where he ﷺ, he didn't receive revelation for something, but he judged based on qiyas, like he made analogy in those situations. But we don't, it is still correct to say that someone who accepts this direction is following him. Because even if the Prophet ﷺ made qiyas and he made wrong qiyas, what would happen?
He would have been corrected.
Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would have corrected him. So it's not necessary to understand. See, here basically Juwayni is laying out the argument on why it's not necessary to understand the mechanism, why it's not necessary to understand the reasoning, but it's important for us, if I'm going to seek fatwa, that I trust the person who I am seeking from. Where do we have this problem? Where do we have this issue? Where people just ask random other people. Right, so usually in an argument. Usually, both sides, nobody really knows knows the answer. There were a group of sisters that were about the permissibility of music, and they were kind of going back and forth. And so then I happened to walk by, and they're like, Sheikh, what about music? I was like, what are you guys doing? They're like, we were arguing. I was like, arguing about what? I said, you're following someone, and she's just following someone. What positions are you arguing? Do you understand the mechanism? Do you understand why it's halal, or do you understand why it's haram? And what are you defending? It sounds to me you're just defending individuals who you trust. It doesn't sound to me like you're defending any particular position. And that's where it becomes a problem. If, as the muqallid, right, or as the mustafti, as the person who's seeking, the moment I get the fatwa, the moment I get the ruling, I'm obligated to what? If I believe it, if I accept it. I have to follow it. Now, someone comes to me and they have the same situation. What am I obligated to do? Tell them to go get their own fatwa. Why? Because I am not a mufti. And this person, even though he has a similar situation, all it takes sometimes is one more variable. And what happens when we introduce that one variable? It'll change the hukm. It'll change the advice. And this is why, as Muslims, again, this is something that's really fundamental and important, I want you guys to take home, is that we should always be gateways. We're not one-stop shops. If somebody comes to me and asks me a question, even if I know the answer, I'm welcome to discuss it with the person. But at the end of the day, if this person needs a ruling, what should they do? I'm sorry? Google it, right?
Yeah.
No.
Because they think in black and white, either completely haram.
So there are people who are definitely binary, right? There's no doubt, right? Non-binary. Anyway, so like, so there are definitely people who think in black and white only, right? They only think in black and white, and they think that, okay, it's either this or it's that. And sometimes there's a gray area that's in between, right? There's no gray area, there's no middle ground, and that's wrong, right? Because that's not the case. If we understand that the Sharia salih likulli makan wa zaman, that the Sharia is appropriate for every time and every place, then there has to be what? There has to be flexibility. There has to be. It's not possible that everything is just solid wrong all the time. So saying that, again, it's important whenever somebody comes to me with fatwa, I have to guide them to someone who can give them that fatwa. This is another problem that we have many times with new Muslims. Well, what did you do? Oh, so-and-so was giving a class. Is this person trusted by the community? Was this person appointed? Did somebody ask this person to give a class? Or is this person going around and just giving their own classes? It's important. These things need to be understood. They need to be recognized. Just because giving a class, it doesn't mean that they're qualified to give fatwa, or to teach even. And we find this a lot with new Muslims. Right? New Muslims, they're naive, right? They don't know. And they're like, okay, this person is Muslim. And automatically, because this person is Muslim, that means that he or she is what? Is trustworthy and good. I'm sorry, that's not good enough. Being Muslim is not the only qualifier. There are a number of other attributes that need to be looked at when we deal with each other.
The length of the beard, for example.
I'm sorry, yeah, like how long his beard is, how short his pants are. You know what I mean? Like these are real, you know what I mean? But we have to understand that if this person is not appointed by the community, or that person in the community, right, that person who's trusted in the community didn't ask this person to do this, then we really need to question. Again, I'm not saying that this person is ignorant, I'm not saying that he's unqualified, but we really need to question the validity of this person, and we have to judge his qualifications. So, lead problematic. I said what? In general? No, right? It's something that's really natural. When I go to a mechanic, do I sit there and ask him to explain to me how a car works? No, right? Or if I go to the dentist is like, all right, you need to remove these wisdom teeth, and you do this. I'll be like, okay, well, so where are you going to cut exactly? And how's the extraction going to be? What tools are you going to use? We're usually like, okay, how much is it going to cost? And we don't go into too many details because we trust the specialists when they speak about their specialty. There's no reason for us to explore further. Can I? Yeah, absolutely, right? I can always ask. I can always inquire. And not just that, the other amazing thing is that there are some people who are lay Muslims, but they will understand specific issues better than some scholars. Because this deen it's not a monopoly, right? It's not owned by the ulama. It's not. The religion is for everyone. And it is very possible that a person becomes very versed in a specific issue. You can ask him anything else and he'll have no idea. But in that specific issue, he spent time, he studied, he looked into it, and he's come to his own conclusion because it might be relevant to his work, it might be something that he's interested in, right? It might be something that he needs for his life, so he needed to look more into it. And I've found myself that people will bring me information to help give me context and help me understand. And that's okay, right? That's part of the beauty of Islam. So, yeah, like I said, if I trust a mechanic when he tells me something, or if a lawyer says, okay, this is the law, I'll be like, okay, no, show me the code book, right? We don't really do that too much. We can, but in general, this doesn't happen. Something that, again, it is something very natural. It is not something that should be looked down upon unless we become muta'assib, right? And unless we use it as means of partisanship, or if I'm following my hawa, if I'm following my desires. So who is a muqallid? Is anyone who can't perform ijtihad. If I cannot perform ijtihad, automatically I am a muqallid. And not just that, even ijtihad, a person can be mujtahid in fiqh. But does it mean that he's mujtahid in hadith? No. A person can be mujtahid in hadith, does it mean that he's mujtahid in the language? No, not necessarily. So even a mujtahid can be a mujtahid in a particular field, in a particular science. And what is ijtihad? This is something that's important too. So ijtihad, Imam al-Haramain, he defines it as is to go to the limits of one's ability to achieve one's objective. Meaning that he goes and he spends all his time, he spends all his energy to come to a conclusion and to come to a ruling. If a fully competent practitioner of diligent inquiry, basically a mujtahid, this entire section is called Shurut al-Mufti, by the way, the conditions of a mufti. He says, inquires diligently into the branches of law and judges correctly. His is a double reward. If he inquires into them diligently and errs, his is a single reward. Meaning that if a mujtahid, if a mufti gives fatwa and his fatwa is wrong, what happens to the person giving fatwa?
He's still rewarded.
He's still given a reward, but he's given one. And if he's correct, he's given two. And we're going to talk about the importance of this hadith. Some say that all who inquire diligently into the branches of law judge correctly, but it cannot be said that all who inquire diligently into theological roots or kalam judge correctly, because that would require us to agree with those who are in error, namely the Christians, the Magians, disbelievers, and the atheists. So here he separates between what we call Sharia and kalam. And he's saying that the room for ijtihad and the room for independent reasoning is wide in the Sharia. But when it comes to ijtihad within Islamic philosophy, that it is what? It's very restricted. It's very restricted. And even if you look into the discussions in philosophy, what are Islamic philosophy or Islamic theology or kalam, whatever you like to call it, what are the main things that are discussed and the main things that are spoken about?
Difference of opinion?
Difference of opinion. So even amongst the theological schools, there are differences of opinion. But what do they differ in? Do they differ in the existence of Allah?
No.
Do they differ in the existence of angels?
Very minute issues.
Right, they're very, very minutiae issues. And what are some of these minutiae issues? For example, the nature of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? His essence, and a discussion of it. But even that, the space of discussion is very limited. A discussion of qadr, a discussion of pre-decree, and what that means. A discussion of agency and free will, and how these things kind of wrestle against each other. But even those discussions are very narrow, right? It's not going to go too far. So when you talk about Islamic theology, when you talk about Islamic philosophy, when you talk about kalam, he's saying that the scope of discussion is very narrow, but the scope of discussion in fiqh is very broad. Because if you allowed for the same type of breadth of discussion within Islamic theology, he said you're going to end up justifying what Christians do, you're going to end up justifying what the Magians do. You might even be able to justify pagans and disbelievers and atheists. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala protect us. So the proof of those who say that not all who exercise diligent inquiry concerning the branches of law judge correctly is that the Prophet ﷺ said, whoever inquires diligently and judges correctly, he is a double reward. His is a double reward, and whoever inquires diligently and errs, his is a single reward. And this is a proof because the Prophet ﷺ declared the practitioner of diligent inquiry, yani the mujtahid, to be in error. So he clearly says, akhta. He clearly says that he has erred, and he affirmed him and another. So what are some of the obstacles to ijtihad? What do you guys think? What prevents an individual from being a true mujtahid?
Lack of training, knowledge.
Okay, knowledge. I think that's something that's really important. Polemics, What do you guys know about polemics? What is that? Polemics is if I ascribe to a particular school, how is that restrictive to ijtihad?
Because you don't.
I'm sorry?
I was going to say you have to follow the school.
Ah, you have to follow the school's methodology. And the moment I follow that methodology, what am I doing to the other schools? I'm being dismissive, right? And you find this, that the privatization of the madhab-based endowments or the privatization of the awqaf, what happens is that when you have scholars who are going to a particular school and they're being funded. So for example, if I'm Maliki and the only schools I can find are being funded by the Shafi'is, I'm now forced to what? To be Shafi'i. Which takes away from the tradition from this side. Other problems, they have madhab-specific judiciaries. So, for example, when Abu Yusuf became head of the judiciary, he ruled with what? With the Hanafi fiqh. And when he started appointing, because he was he was like the head qadi. He was qadi qudat. He was the chief justice. Who do you think he appointed? He appointed other Hanafis. And the moment you start appointing people of the madhab, what happens to the other madhab? They are no longer representative in that judiciary. Madhab-specific political positions, and this happened a lot during our Islamic history, where there would be fights, there would be wars, people would be removed if they weren't the same madhab as you. It was very sad. And there was a lot of intellectual stagnation that went on in Islamic history. And why is that? Because of the traditionalism. What do you guys know about traditionalism? This is what we call the mu'tamid culture. Nowadays we call it neo-traditionalism. It's set in stone. Yeah, musallimat ghair. But the mu'tamid means that this is the position of the madhab, therefore what? You cannot go against it, you cannot go outside of it.
The absolute truth.
This is the absolute ruling, and this is the one that needs to be accepted. And it's something that happens across the madhab, right? This is not specific to particular madhabs. But they say this is the position of the madhab, and that's it. It's over. It's done. And no need for masalih. This is the other extreme. What are you talking about? What are you talking about these masalih? Why do you need to look to potential pros and cons for that? Both of these things, they bring a lot of rigidity. They bring a lot of intellectual stagnation. And just an example of no need for masalih. If we said that there's no such thing as maslaha, there's no such thing as potential pros and cons, what are some things that we would not be able to do today in the world? Forget just the United States.
The internet.
I'm sorry?
The internet as a whole would be out the window.
What would be out the window?
The internet.
Oh, the internet?
Yes.
Possibly.
They
But I mean, there's more control that you can put on that. But other things that we all suffer from and we have problems with. Going to school. Most people go to school how?
Happy.
Huh? Happy? Allah musta'an. Right. Most people go to higher education. Who is funding the education? The government is. And how is the government funding it? Because we are applying for? We're applying for financial aid and loans. A lot of people who purchase homes here in the United States. How do they purchase their homes? FHA. Well, that's fine for the first-time homeowners, right? But at the end of the day, why are they doing that?
To not be homeless.
To not be homeless. Okay. Well, you can rent, right? But there are a lot of things that we have to understand, like masalih take a role. And it's something that's really important. And if we just completely throw it out the window, it becomes very difficult for us to navigate our lives, in many places in the world. Usage of credit cards. You have a number of scholars that allow it, even though many credit cards are clearly what? Ribawi, clearly. Why is it okay? Maslah, because there's a need for it. There's a necessity. Also, it's a human endeavor, meaning what? That people who make ijtihad can what? They can make mistakes. Right? They're humans, right? So as long as there's humans, not only will they make mistakes, they're going to be affected by what? Their social environment. They'll be affected by their social environment, they'll be affected by their political environment, and those will have an influence on their fatwa. Those will have an influence on the rulings, etc., that they make. So, how can one make ijtihad and still stay true to the tradition? And is it important to stay true to the tradition or not?
Sure.
Yes, it is. Absolutely. Why?
You're not knowledgeable about it.
All right, so knowledge, if you just change that word a little bit. Why is it important, again, and this is a very similar reasons to what we had spoken about previously. Why is it important to rely on earlier scholars?
Because they knew more.
They had access to more resources, right? So understanding and maintaining tradition, one of the reasons that's important is because you have a fatwa from an imam, and then all of us, it's reinforced, then it's further reinforced, it's further reinforced. So you're talking about 7-8 generations of a particular ruling being reinforced. That should give me more what? Confidence, right? It's going to give me more confidence because now I have generations of scholars who've actually, they see that this fatwa has been tried and tested, and it's held up to the test of time. And because it's held up to the test of time, it's something that we should take more confidence in when we're dealing with it. So there are 3 conditions here, or 3 things that the scholars talk about. They call it tanqih al-manat, takhrij al-manat, tahqiq al-manat. What do these 3 things mean? So when we talk about tanqih al-manat, it's justification for a ruling. If a scholar makes a particular ruling, what should I do now as a researcher? Right, I have to figure out why he said it. Right, I have to figure out why he said it. If I can figure out why he said it, and again, that's something that gives me more confidence. The thing I can do is called takhrij al-manat. Takhrij al-manat is a little bit different. Identifying the cause or the reason. Because this one is the justification. This is looking for the basis for the ruling. This is looking for the reasoning for the ruling. And the reasoning is something that we call the illah. Right? So if I can figure out the reasoning, both of these things help me with the justification and conviction on the correctness of that particular ruling. And if I understand both of these things, this was done relatively early on. So you're talking about within the first few generations of Islam, this was the main focus. This was the main focus. Later on, the last one, the tahqiq al-manat, this is what took precedence, and this is what we're mostly practicing. And this is how to apply those rulings to us. Because the rulings are there. Most of them, we have the dalil. Most of them, we understand the reasoning. Now, how do we actually apply it? And this is where most of our time is being spent today, in number 3. We have all these rulings. How do we make them relevant? And how do we apply them to our situation today? So there is extremism in Ishihad. So they say all these sciences are unnecessary. So you have a big modern movement saying that, okay, get rid of tradition. يعني نحن رجال كما هم رجال. يعني we're men just like they're men. And I can do my own Ishtihad. I have access to all of these tools. This is one extreme. The other extreme is setting this unrealistic bar. So have you guys ever heard the term mujtahid mutlaq? So the mujtahid mutlaq is like this magical being that has mastered every single science, you know what I mean? And he's able to independently come up with all these things. But you'll find that amongst the classical scholars, even amongst those people who we call to be mujtahid mutlaq, you can see the weakness in some of the sciences. But even then, we call them mujtahid mutlaq. So it's important to have a balance between these two. The mujtahid mutlaq is not some magical position, right? He actually exists, right? This person actually does exist, and reaching that position is realistic for the one who is able, for the one who strives to be that. So, and not just that, understanding that there's a spectrum within the mujtahid community. Is every mujtahid created equal? No, absolutely not. There are some people Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given them better memory. There are some people Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given them a better depth of knowledge. There are some people Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given them access to more resources. There are some people Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has gifted them with the ability to use those resources. There are some people who Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has made incredibly intelligent. And if we understand that all of these differences and these factors can come into play, all of them should add to us understanding that within this community that you will always have a spectrum of people. So what is the bar of ijtihad? I think this is an important discussion. It's being grounded in the sciences. And like I said, being grounded in the sciences is understanding where to go back to if I want to deal with a particular issue in tafsir, if I want to deal with a particular issue in Arabic language, if I want to deal with a particular issue in hadith, for example. Working back through the tradition. So what happens ideally is that if I want to understand something, I tend to read a modern book of fiqh. right? That's the starting point. I start with a modern book of fiqh, and then what do? Then I go backwards, right? Then I'll go into a more classical work. Then I'll go into a more classical work. And then I'll go into, eventually, to the foundation of the madhab itself. You know, whether Mudawwana for the Malikis, or whether it be Usul of Muhammad bin Hassan, or whether it be, the Al-Umm, the Shafi, or if I go to Masail Ahmed, for the Hanbalis, right? It's just a matter of working back through the tradition. And why do I do that? Because a modern book is going to speak to me. It's going to speak to me in my language. It's going to help me understand the structure of fiqh, how it works. And so when I go back, I have a reference point and I understand, okay, this is where this, right? So this ruling that's here, okay, this is where it came from. And this is why he used it. This is why he placed it here. And it helps create that mental structure I have in my mind. And I'm going to start building up my foundation to help me actually understand and extract those rulings myself. Understanding modern mechanisms and processes. This is something that Osman had mentioned earlier. That I can have through these things, right? I can be grounded in the sciences, I can go back and I can understand all of the classical discussions, blah, blah, blah. But if I don't understand what is going on in the world around me today, how applicable are those sciences going to be? And this is why you'll have those super literalist dealings with a lot of issues. And this is why you'll have major problems in understanding and application, because there is no understanding of what is going on the ground. So what are acceptable parameters for a ruling? So I actually took this from my sheikh's book. It's called Ikhtilaf al-Muftiyin, the difference of opinion amongst the muftis or the scholars of fiqh. And he says here that there are 5 conditions to make a ruling acceptable. He says, 1, the one making the ruling himself is a scholar. The ruling not oppose an established ijma', and ijma' is something that we had discussed earlier. The ruling not go outside the statements of the salaf or agree on imams, meaning it doesn't oppose them as a whole. The ruling not oppose a foundational principle, something that the usul, with enough time passing for that principle to be tested or challenged, or an established proof or text to prove it is unfounded with enough time passing for that proof to be tested or challenged. So both of these are very similar, the only difference being that you have an usul that's being challenged, and the other one you have a proof or a dalil that's being challenged. If a foundational principle is unfounded, then by extension, any ruling that is built upon it will also be considered unfounded. And lastly, the ruling not oppose a clearly established proof, that proof has an explicit understanding. So if the Prophet ﷺ naha an namima, right? He prohibited tale carrying. He prohibited sharing stories and tale carrying. Is there any other way to understand that hadith? Absolutely not. That is something that would be considered an clearly established proof with an explicit understanding. There's no way to maneuver it and take it another way. So ijtihad and intellectual curiosity are highly encouraged in Islam. And why? Is because there's this hadith that we had spoken about. Just imagine if the Prophet ﷺ said that if a mujtahid makes ijtihad and he's wrong, he gets a sin. Just imagine that. He said if he makes ijtihad and he's wrong, he gets a sin, and if he's right, he gets 2 rewards. Will people be encouraged to make ijtihad? Absolutely not. And this intellectual curiosity is something that is highly encouraged, and this is why it's highly developed in Islam. Are we in a post-madhab era? What do you guys think?
Do we have 10 hours?
Huh?
Do we have
10
hours to talk about?
10 hours? We don't need 10 hours.
Are we in
Post-madhab era.
What does that imply?
Implies that the madhahib don't have the same significance that they did previously.
What country are we in?
if I'm Shafi'i, I'm not okay?
Huh?
If I'm Shafi'i, I'm not okay?
May Allah guide you, Sheikh Mahmoud. بالسؤال اقترحت السؤال بس.
I think yes, we are.
Yes,
Especially
okay.
in non-Muslim nations,
Sure.
like America, we have at least 2 fiqh bodies,
Yeah,
fiqh councils,
Yeah.
and the members of those are, and those councils are not bound to one madhab.
Yeah.
Each member comes from different background,
Absolutely.
from different school.
sure. I think that's very telling. So the majama' fiqhiyya, the fiqh councils that have been established, you don't have a majma' fiqhiyya al-Hanbali, or majma' fiqhiyya al-Shafi'i, or majma' fiqhiyya, al-Maliki. You don't have those. All these majama' fiqhiyya, it's actually people from different fiqhi backgrounds who are coming together to come up with solutions, and sometimes those solutions are what? Sometimes they're outside the madhab, and they're borrowed positions. That's one place where this is expressed. Where else is this clearly expressed? Islamic banking. You don't have Bank al-Islami al-Hanbali, right? Or Bank al-Islami al-Shafi'i, or Bank al-Islami al-Hanafi. You have that. Why?
Because everybody needs money. It's not something.
So this is something that everybody suffers and faces from. So what are they trying to do? They're trying to look for even the most unique, borrowed opinions to do what? To facilitate and navigate. So can we say we're in a complete post-madhab era? No, not completely, right? So there are a lot of us, in general, when we ascribe to a madhab, where do we ascribe to the madhab in? In what particular aspects? Mostly ibadat. تفضل يا محمود.
Yeah, I follow the Qur'an and the Hadith.
الله أكبر. على فهم الشيخ محمود. الله أكبر. هداني الله إلى خير. So the thing is, and it's a valid question, right? So there's a lot of pushback. So when we had talked about extreme understandings, one of them was what? That, well, is it not enough for me to understand the Qur'an and the Sunnah? Is that okay or no? That is okay. It is okay, mashallah. Jayyid. All right, for those who say it's not okay, why is it not okay?
Do you have enough training and knowledge to understand?
Okay, training, knowledge, all of these are I think these are very good points that you're making. At the end of the day, has the ummah accepted me as an imam? Me? Yeah, the ummah Islamiyah has accepted me as an imam. No. So if the ummah hasn't accepted me as an imam, what gives me the authority now to extract rulings from these ayat and hadith? Versus, if I going back to Shafi, why is it okay for me to take Shafi? So why should I trust Shafi over Farhan? Because the ummah has what?
More contact.
Allah talaqahu biqubul. The ummah has accepted him as an imam. The ummah has not accepted me as an imam. And that's something that we need to think about. Right? So does it have a role? Yeah, it has a role in ibadat, for sure. And I think that's where the dawr, and that's where I think that it will continue to stay. Because even when you start getting into more, when you start getting into mu'amalat, when you start getting into like transactions and dealings, all of a sudden what happens? Like the door starts opening up a little bit. And then, yeah, a lot. And then when you start getting into jinayat, when you start getting into capital and corporal punishment, what happens? The door opens up like all the way. And the reason for that is because we have kind of entered the stage. And we've kind of entered the state where people are looking for ways out. And the only way out is to do this al-Fiqh, is to borrow from the other madahib. Because we're looking for ways to navigate. Yes?
So if we're actually post-madhab, then why were the madhabs necessary initially?
Because there was a need for them, right? There's always going to, we have to understand that everything evolved, right? There's always going to be an evolution of particular sciences. And not just that, what did I say very clearly? That do the madahib have a role today?
Not as much as they used to.
No, they still do. They do. Very.
Very.
No, the madahib still have a role today. They have a role in ibadat, right? We said this very clearly. And not just that, can I just throw 1,100 years of tradition out the window?
Absolutely.
Does that make sense? No. And even this post-madhab era, I'm still reliant on what? I'm still reliant on the madhab, right? Like, I still need to go back and read those books to help me extract and understand and take rulings. If I don't, I need that information because remember, what did we say? If I remove them, I've now removed any type of boundary. And as Muslims, we always have to stay what? Within boundaries. What are those boundaries? The boundaries is our tradition. The boundaries are the madhahib are an expression of the Sharia. We have to understand that an individual madhab is not the entire Sharia, but we understand all of those madhahib represent as a whole what? Sharia Islamiyah. And that is from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And if we understand that, they will continue having a role. There's no doubt. We can't dismiss them. And the role that they had initially was that so we would have canonization. So we would have a judiciary, so that we would actually have steps. Like now, walillah alhamd, anybody who goes and studies Sharia, you have a course syllabus ready to go and study that particular madhab. And where did that come from? It didn't fall from the sky, right? It came from create. You know what I mean? Like there had to be tadarruj, there had to be steps that were put in place so that when people go and approach, because fiqh is vast, it's wide. I need to have a starting place, and then you had scholars who wrote short books. Longer books, you know what I mean? And then longer books of those longer books, and then you had those who commented on those longer books. You know what I mean? Like, and you need that. You need that because you need explanations for different things. You need ways out. You need help in understanding those things. So, are we in a post-madhab era? Particularly, right? Like somewhat, not completely. But there are clear spaces where this does apply. And like I said, the Majam' al-Fiqhiyah, the fiqh councils in the world today is a clear example that we're kind of past that. It's not a madhab thing anymore. And Islamic banking. This is another clear clear issue where we've kind of moved past that. It's good. You know what I mean? I don't think it's a bad thing because we're still relying on the madhab essentially, but it gives us more room to navigate. And, you know, and Allah knows best. So where do we go from here?
That's it.
Yeah. No, I mean, so you guys, I've presented some of the problems, I've presented some of the issues. Are you guys, do you feel hopeful?
Absolutely.
Right? Do you feel that there's room to navigate, or do you feel like, oh my God, this is just too overwhelming? Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. Alhamdulillah. And yeah. You know, and the nice thing is like because we have this rich tradition, it helps us move forward that much easier because it gives us more room to navigate. It gives us more positions to take a hold of. It gives us more of an ability to make rulings. It gives us more space to understand. You know, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give us tawfiq. So this question was like a two-part question. Where do we go from here, like in terms of fiqh? Also, where do we go from here in terms of class, right? So in terms of class, you guys have a choice. We can either go into mu'amalat. We can discuss transactions. Thumbs down, okay. You like transactions? Okay. Or or is it ijma sukuti? Yeah. Or I can do a course on hadith. The hadith?
Let's see what.
خلاص إن شاء الله. Maybe I could do hands. Who'd like to do hadith? Okay. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Because democracy is kufr. Got it. Right. 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Okay. Who would like to do? Who would like to go into mu'amalat? Who would like to go into transactions? 2, 3. No, sorry. No, sorry, Aisha. You lost it. So inshallah we'll go into hadith inshallah, and then after we finish the hadith course, then after that we can come back inshallah. Like I said, it's not an issue of are we doing it? It's an issue of when. That's all. So we will get to it inshallah. So don't worry about that. We'll take care of it bi'idhnillah. I'll give you guys 5 minutes, and then we'll come back inshallah for the tazkiyah class. Wallahu a'lam wa sallallahu ala khayri khalqin nabiyina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam.